yet.
We've got oops. That's how I know that song.
Hi, I'm Dino.
Hi, Dino. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Sorry for that.
You guys are about to push me up.
I know, like the panel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to LitFest 2022. My name is Torin Jensen. I'm the program manager here at Lighthouse, and this is the Inspiration Tour. We'll be featuring 5 panelists tonight, but before I introduce everyone, a couple of quick announcements. For those of you watching online, you're not on camera or mic, so please submit your questions via the chat, and you'll find a link to our upcoming salon, Art Friends, The Pleasures and Perils of Writers Groups, in the chat bar. It's going to be a great conversation. Hope to see you all there. For those of you here in person, please take any phone calls or conversations outside and save your questions for the end, at which point feel free to line up at the microphone up front here to have your question asked of the panelists. If you'd like to purchase a book and have it signed by any of our panelists tonight, please visit Matter's pop-up store in the back there, our official LitFest book selling partner. And finally, if you're looking for classes and workshops with space still left, please see the info booth or the link in the chat for our cheat sheet. I'd like to thank the SAFD, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Colorado Creative Industries for helping to make LitFest 2022 possible, in addition to York Street Yards for the generous use of this wonderful space, and a special thank you to Shop at Matter, our official bookseller. And first up, we have Elisa Gabbert, is the author of 6 collections of poetry, essays, and criticism. She writes the On Poetry column for the New York Times, and her work has appeared in Harper's, The New Yorker, The Believer, and elsewhere. Her next collection of nonfiction, Any Person is the Only Self, will be out in 2023 from FSG. Thanks for joining us online, Elisa. R. Alan Brooks teaches graphic novel writing at Regis University and is the creator of the Burning Metronome graphic novel, a supernatural murder mystery with social commentary. He also hosts the popular Motherfucker in a Cape comics podcast, which focuses on marginalized members of the geek world. He writes the Colorado Sun weekly comic, What I'd Miss, as well as comic books for Pop Culture Classroom, Xenoscope Entertainment, and more. In addition, Alan is a musician and noted stage host, regularly emceeing celebrity events like the Dink Award Show, Arise Music Festival, and more. Thanks for joining us, Alan. Dino Enrique Piacentini grew up in Los Angeles, lived in San Francisco for 20 years, and has also at various times set down stakes in Houston, Oaxaca, Champaign, and Prague. His work has been or will be published in the Massachusetts Review, Pembroke, Atticus Review, Gulf Coast, the Toronto Globe and Mail, and Confrontation, among other places. He has taught creative writing at various universities and served as fiction editor at Gulf Coast. Currently, he lives in Denver with a full-size husband and a mini Bernedoodle, and teaches creative writing at Lighthouse Writers Workshop and the University of Denver. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dino. And finally, Gretchen Schaefer was born, raised, and currently lives and works in Denver. She earned a bachelor's degree in English Literature and Visual Arts from Regis University. She's a co-founding member of artist-owned and operated Tank Studios, LLC, a sustainable, community-centered studio space for professional artists in Denver. Her artwork has been exhibited at numerous locations, including the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, University of Colorado Boulder Museum of Art, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver, among others. Hi, Gretchen. And now our moderator, Alexander Lumans, was awarded a 2018 NEA Creative Writing Grant in Fiction. He was also awarded a fellowship to the 2015 Arctic Circle Residency and was the spring 2014 Philip Roth Resident at Bucknell University. His short story, Amchitka, 3 Tests, was a distinguished story of 2020 in the Best American Short Stories of 2021 anthology. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in the Paris Review, Electric Literature's Recommended Reading, Guernica, The Walrus, Gulf Coast, Off Assignment, among others. Thanks for moderating tonight, Lumans, and I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Torin. Can you all hear me? Yes? Awesome. Thank you all for coming, and those of you who are tuning in virtually, I appreciate it as well, even though I just assume there will be thousands of you tuning in virtually. I'm excited to moderate this panel, the Inspiration Tour, and I'm going to start us off with, I guess, a question that I didn't actually pose to all of you yet. It's an easy question, but it comes from a McSweeney's piece called First Drafts of the Greatest Opening Sentences in Literature. And just a couple examples are, Call Me Greg, Moby Dick. Or they used to call him the Good Gatsby, but then as the Great Gatsby. So I'm wondering, for all of you in first lines, like what is something that has inspired a first line or a first stroke or an idea that started a piece that came to fruition for you?
Okay, so I wrote. Everyone can hear me? Okay, yes. Okay, I wrote and drew a graphic novel for an anthology book called Denver Noir that just came out. We're doing a reading on Wednesday night, and the first line of that is, "With certain white girls." That's how it starts. And first of all, it's maybe the blackest thing I ever wrote. Secondly, I thought that that the publisher wouldn't like it, but what it was expressing was this sort of, I guess we would call it a microaggression, where people approach me with their expectation of what they think black is, and try to sort of confine me to it, like, like they'll be like, "Hey, my mechanic is black," or something like that, right? And what does that mean? Do you know what I mean? So that was kind of my prompting thing, was to start with that line, to sort of deconstruct someone reversing that paradigm, et cetera. And it's a bit provocative. So I think that was the answer to the question.
Sure. I can't think of the actual first line, but the thing that maybe inspired a recent story, I was living in San Francisco, and I had a very unfriendly apartment building that I lived in. Nobody smiled. They grimaced at you as you passed on the way that, as you passed them on the stairs. And the guy below me was especially unfriendly. And one day, I was walking up the stairs, and there was the landing. I was just one floor above him, and the door was wide open, and there was a gigantic stuffed tiger staring at me from his hallway. I didn't know it was stuffed at the time. At first I was like, "There's a tiger." And then I was like, "Oh, it's stuffed." And I was sort of stopped, stared at this odd thing. Not so odd in San Francisco, but still a little odd. And he came by. And I was like, I thought, oh, here's my opportunity to kind of get to know my neighbor and sort of make some friendly comment. I was like, "Oh, why do you have a tiger? That's kind of an interesting, odd thing." And he kind of looked at me and he was like, "Not really." And so I never met him, but that inspired a story that actually is coming up in Pembroke. So I got something out of it.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking a little bit, I'm a visual artist, so when I'm thinking about language in my work, it often shows up in titles or descriptions of the work, since I don't use language in my visual work. But those lines remind me of, and kind of the way you approached that, Lumans, was as if like these lines magically appeared in the writer's mind. And I've always liked what George Saunders says about his editing process, and I love how he talks about that process and how he doesn't want to bring his first draft self to things. And so I actually envision those lines not being conjured out of nowhere, but probably had been written over and over and retuned and refined. And so for me, it makes me think of, I had a solo exhibition at the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art a couple years ago. And I came up with this really cheesy title for it. It was something like Power Pose, and sort of connected to this like trend of women like making these sort of stances in the mirror before, and it was super cliched and dumb, and something was right, but that was just the first thing that came to mind. And that, like, I could feel in my body, I'm a very somatic person, so in my body I knew it wasn't right, but like I had to give them a title. And we went to dinner, my husband and I went to dinner with one of my closest friends who's a painter, and the work I've been making is a lot about rocks. Nature is a big place of inspiration for me. And maybe we'll talk more about that in terms of nature and rocks. But anyway, he was talking about the definition of the formation of mountains, and some of the terms that are used there are folding and thrusting. And I was like, that's the title of the exhibition. That's what this exhibition is about. And so that, like, for me, it's a lot of in conversation with artists that are way smarter than me, and kicking things, and also in that safe place, because I knew that title wasn't right, but I knew, like with these people, I could talk it through, and it would come to me. And when that rang true in my body, I knew that was the right opener.
Elisa?
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I can't like see your faces, so if you're making meaningful expressions and trying to make eye contact, I'm gonna miss it. But I've got a nice little side view. You guys just look so small. Hi. I wish I could be there. Lumans, it's funny that you read that line. Was it "Call Me Greg"?
Yeah. Call me Greg.
I noticed at some point how often like good first lines of novels are about a name. Like Mrs. Bridge. It's funny. I think as a collection writer, and I wonder if this is true for you too, because I mostly write short forms like poems and essays. It often feels like the first line doesn't have to hold quite as much weight as like the first line of a novel would, where it has to kind of set the tone for the entire book. I always feel like the first line of the first poem or the first essay in a collection, it doesn't have to do quite so much work. And so I'm like not that fussy about it usually until it gets to the book composition stage. And then of course I want it to be a good and a striking first line. But my last essay collection, I noticed that almost all of them started with some kind of timestamp. Like, it was this time of year when I did this, or, one day I was in a place and I started doing this. Like, I always tend to just kind of start by situating. Like, that's how I start to tell the story. It's very much the cliche, like, it was a dark and stormy night.
Thank you. And I guess my next question then would be, in terms of like your current projects or projects that you have in progress, what's something that's currently influencing you or inspiring ideas or structure or the process that you're following for the project itself? Like, what's the specific thing that that you are drawing inspiration from, like as of today?
Well, I'll start. When I think about inspiration, I think there's a lot of forms, a lot of things it can mean, right? There's that moment, the eureka moment of inspiration, right? That's one thing. There's stuff that seeps into your writing that you may not be actually even aware of. It might be I can talk about COVID for a long time about how that's influencing my work and inspiring my work in ways that I'm not 100% aware of or understanding quite yet. There's stuff that you draw from, family stories for me, quite often. They're great forms of inspiration. Things that I draw from, things that you've read. And then there's books you've read maybe recently or images you've seen that really make you understand some other possibilities you might have for your writing that you hadn't thought about. So I'm going to go with that, which I teach. I've taught a few reading as a writer classes here at Lighthouse, and they've been really fantastic because they're collaborative, and we all come together and look at some book and figure out, okay, pull up the hood and kind of go, what's happening in this book? How does this work? How does this not work? And a book we recently looked at in one of my classes was Olga Tokarczuk's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which is an incredible book. If you're looking for a good book recommendation, that's it, let me tell you. And one of the interesting things about it, it's a first-person narrative, but there's a lot of reflection that the narrator does. She fits in a lot of reflection about the world. She's an astrology expert, so about the universe, about how things align, and I think quite often in American fiction, we're kind of taught to just go straight to the action. Don't spend too much time just kind of reflecting and, cogitating about something that maybe doesn't feel immediately connected. Don't go off on tangents. She goes off on tangents, and it's fantastic. And I'm interested in trying that in my own fiction, going off on tangents, but making it work within the story, because I've also seen where you can go off on tangents and it becomes, well, like right now, just rambling. So I think that's something, this book by Olga Tokarczuk. Yeah.
So for myself, I think I'd say I'm largely inspired by compassion. I feel like art at its height is a way of grappling with intangible aspects of humanity. So like some experience, some feeling, something that we did not have a way of describing or identifying. And so for me, as a writer, I'm always looking at what affects the people around me, what affects the people I love or the people that I don't love. Like what causes pain, what causes people to be after a good thing and do it in an evil way. And in many ways, I find that source of inspiration bottomless because there's so many human experiences that I'll never know them all. And they do largely inform the way that I create things. So, I was trying to think if there was like a specific piece, like if I could be like, read this book or watch this movie. But I think that the biggest well that I draw from is my concern for other human beings.
Yeah, I've been exploring maybe something similar to that. I try at the beginning of every year to have like a word that kind of helps me set an intention for that year. And so for and I do it like around New Year's. So January 2020, the word distance was really interesting to me, and then it became a whole different kind of word. And understanding sort of perception and what we can perceive or know at a distance. And so I often use drawing as a way to know something. I feel like it's a very intimate, the way you have to observe something to draw it is a kind of looking that we don't do in our normal lives. It takes a kind of energy and focus. And so thinking about distance and using that practice as like a attempt at understanding device, drawing as that. I've been interested in drawing moon rocks from the Apollo missions and then meteorites that they find in Antarctica, just to think of like how could you understand a thing that is beyond a distance or a time that I could ever fathom. And I don't know, I mean, it's stretching things, but we're artists, so we can do that. But like in this act of trying to understand something that vast, can I build empathy, right? Like I'm thinking about empathy in that same way of like, could I give it time and give it space and give it the attention to learn more about it? So it's happening in some ways with my rock drawings right now. Yeah.
And then Elisa?
Gretchen, my book that's coming out in a few months is called Normal Distance. So it's been an important word to me too.
That's great.
I wrote a book proposal last year, and as I was getting towards the end, I was trying to pad it out a little bit. And so I was trying to think of things that I've always wanted to write about, but have never found a good excuse to write about. And I kept coming back to Point Break, which is one of my kind of like desert island movies, I guess. Like I've loved it ever since I was a little kid. I love making people who've never seen it watch it with me. And every single time I watch it, I always have the experience of like wanting to start it over from the beginning and watch it again right away. I don't know why I have this relationship with this movie. I don't like surf or anything like that. But I really wanted to figure it out and get to the bottom of why I love Point Break so much. So I baked this essay into the proposal, and I decided to make it about like revisiting art over and over again throughout your life, and how the art changes and how you change. And this book is mostly literary essays and kind of like personal, critical. So I have to get some books in there. So I've been trying to reread books that I haven't read since I was a kid as part of this project, which has been really inspiring to me. I normally don't let myself reread things because I feel like there's too many books in the world and I don't have time. But yeah, I reread Catcher in the Rye, which I haven't read since I was probably 15, and that was a really enlightening experience. And I'm basically just allowing myself this this pleasure of like just reveling in things that I've already experienced, not challenging myself at all, except insofar as I'm trying to figure out why I ever liked them, and why, if I do still like them, why that's the case.
I love this range of inspirations. We got Tangents, Compassion, Moon Rocks, and Point Break. That's amazing. Like that. There's your project, like joint project right there.
So like a recipe.
Yeah, exactly. For genius. Yeah. And I think I love that it's all like all registers of culture and all like avenues of culture as well, and just like human experience, but also like products of art that other people have made, and then even just like geology. Like that's an amazing sort of, I think, range, and shows that inspiration isn't just necessarily I don't know, like reading just a single book and saying like, oh, that was an amazing book and now I want to write my own or whatever. It's like digging deeper than that. So then I'm curious, and maybe I would add, like, for me, my Instagram hashtag Arctic feed, since I'm writing a book about the Arctic, is like my inspiration in some ways. It's just like seeing these images from the Arctic since I'm not there, and it's amazing how many actually come through on Instagram, and it's like overwhelming. And it's like pictures of the Arctic and then ads for DiGiorno pizza or something. But I'm curious, is there any point in your process of making art and creation where you want to shut out inspiration, or where you may want to press pause on that and say like, okay, I've gotten enough of that, now I can kind of just like work on my own thing? Like, is there any point in the process where you actively try and do that, or does it just kind of naturally happen, or does it never happen?
Oh, well, I don't think I worry about shutting out inspirations very often, and it's because my version, even if I were imitating somebody, my version of what they would do would be different just because it's me. Yeah. Because it's been, the inspiration was an ingredient that was baked in with other ingredients, and so the product comes out as something different. My approach to it, my perspective, is most likely going to be different. But I guess I also want to say that there are times that it's important to me to hear my own voice, you know, like write out of the quiet of my soul, so to speak. And yeah, so that's kind of the balance for me on that topic, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't feel like in terms of inspiration, I have the anxiety of influence kind of thing. I think later I want to be mindful of that and critical, but kind of going back to earlier, thinking about, so being open to inspiration at all times, I think that can be good even within the midst of a project, but it's maybe not inspiration, but being careful of that critical voice, and when that comes in, whether it's my own or other people's, I've learned there's times where I can't share the work too early because I don't want to know what other people think, because I have to like let it happen, and it's so hard to be mindful in that practice of being present in the work before you even start to decide what the work is for yourself or criticize it, and all the voices of like, you're not good enough, this is, you know, what is this about? It's stupid rocks. What are you doing with your time? And so that's enough work, right, to not mess with that. But in terms of, so maybe it's different. It's more of a process thing and less of an inspiration point. But being open to that, the inspiration part, I think is fine. And then later, going back and making sure it doesn't feel, like a copycat situation, or that you're writing the right line of an homage to a reproduction.
Yeah, I would agree with what both of you said, and I think work gets revised and revised and revised, and every new revision brings up new questions, I find, because the work goes in places that I'm not expecting, and perhaps what is happening in the world or in my life or what I'm thinking about will seep into a new revision. So that's sort of inspiring in some respects, that new revision. I may come out with questions like, wow, I want to make this work, I want to add in tangents to this work. How do I do that? I may go in and look at different writers who are really good at that. I mentioned Tokarczuk. Somebody like Milan Kundera or Zadie Smith, for example, very good at that. So I just feel like with every revision, I kind of am always asking new questions. So I don't worry if things change. I don't worry if there are new inspirations seeping in. And I don't worry about, I agree, I don't worry about it becoming, I'll never write, like some of these writers, because I write like myself. So I don't worry too much about that either. So.
Elisa?
I do feel like there's a point where I have to stop, but I think it's the way I approach like essay writing. I do a lot of research. Like that's usually where it starts for me. And I love the research phase. Like it takes the bulk of the time that I put into writing an essay, and it's really the fun part. It's when I feel like I'm indulging in inspiration, and it usually starts with some little curiosity that then I kind of nurture into an obsession. And I can go overboard. Like I've done it before, and if I have too much material, if I do too much research, it just gets to be overwhelming, and I find that I'm not finding where I am in it. And it's not that, it's not that I'm worried about being influenced. It's more like, where is there room for my voice in all this material? How do I organize it, right? Like, how can I come to this material as the organizing intelligence? And if I get too much, then it just starts to get away from me. And what I've done in the past when I've had that problem often is like, I've had to completely reconceive the way I usually write an essay. So there was one essay in my last book where I had so much material that I basically wrote a bunch of little mini essays and like strung them together because I couldn't figure out how to make it into one piece. But yeah, I feel like I learned my lesson. Like at some point I have to like cut off that magpie tendency to just collect and collect and collect and collect, because then I can't fit it into the container. So yeah, that's something that I've just, I think, gotten better at over time, like knowing when it's time to stop being inspired and time to just sit down and write.
I think all your answers like really spoke to like trying to curate like your own voice and like protect that, but also allow it to be like dynamic and having other elements and layers to it. I think for myself, I think if I read other writers that I admire a lot, I tend to like feel my language become their language and their sentences, and it's really toxic and dangerous sometimes. When I was in grad school, and this is something I will never recommend for you to do, I read everything Cormac McCarthy wrote, and then everything I wrote was just terrible Cormac McCarthy ripoffs, to the point that I wrote a novella for my MFA thesis, and in the committee defense, no one talked about it. It was just like, yeah, we're just gonna put that aside because it was just terrible Cormac McCarthy, and I had to like purge him from my system. Like it felt like I needed to be exercised or something for my body. But I love this idea of like preserving voice, but also letting voice continue to evolve too. So then, I guess I don't know if this builds necessarily out of that, but if you encounter, say, artist block or writer's block, or at least if you come up against the page or the canvas or whatever, and you just feel stuck, is there something that you use yourself to get out of that? Either something that you use over and over, or is it something that you try differently every time? Like when you are stuck or when you are feeling that kind of pressure or fear of the beginning, what do you do?
Yeah, I had this pretty intensely through COVID. When I was thinking about this panel, I could right away identify the things that do not inspire me, and a pandemic is one for sure. You know, the news, and I read a lot of the news, and that does not inspire me. I found out. And so I've really struggled over the last couple of years. I've still been making work, and I am proud of some of the things that have come out of this time, and they felt right and important, and I was proud of them. But I just have been struggling to work in the studio space, and like almost afraid to go there, and like there was some kind of vibe, I think, happening there. So, and actually the vibe was that there was no play or joy. I had like lost that sense of like just exploring and playing with materials and that kind of thing. So that's what it was. So I actually started, I've been teaching myself how to throw pots on the wheel. I work at an art school, and so I have access to a ceramic studio, and it has been the best thing because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I get to be really naive in a wonderful way, and I don't have the anxiety of object making because if it doesn't work, if it fails, I can just ball it up and the clay is recycled and we can make a new pot out of it. It's like a beautiful material for that forgiveness. And so it's been this great place to like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm sitting alongside with students and just really having an open mind of what I can do. And what I discovered is that like my mind and hands are very connected still, and I can make pots, you know? And it's just been this amazing experience of finding play and joy and openness to those failures and less pressure. And the practice is quite mindful. You have to be very present looking at this wheel, and so that's been sort of a helpful moment.
I like the idea of balance, you know, like, because we seize on something that we're working on in this really intense way, like it has to represent our entire soul or something, yeah. Right? So two things that I use. One is, especially before the pandemic, I would go dancing at least 3 times a week. And so, you know, I could be on the dance floor and something that was like a story problem where I was stuck would suddenly like pop in my head. And then, you know, I'd have to leave the dance floor and then write it in my phone, you know, and then go back to moonwalking or whatever it is I'm doing, right? So I think that's one thing. And some people use running, some people take a walk, they stretch. But then the other thing is the way that I approach writing is to not use inspiration as a fuel for it, right? Like, since inspiration is so fleeting, when it hits, I write down all those ideas. But the actual execution of those ideas is separate. I don't rely on inspiration for those things. I treat that like work. So it means that if I've decided that the idea that I came up with when I was inspired was X, then when the inspiration's gone, I write a list of how do I accomplish X? Okay, I'm gonna write this part, I'm gonna develop these characters, I'm gonna do this research, whatever. And so then when I go to write, it's not so much do I feel like writing, it's here's the next thing on my list to do. And as I do that, I find myself making it to the end of the list and what? I have a book.
It's that easy.
Yeah.
It's very easy. You know, what both you all say, absolutely. I mean, I think getting into your body is a really good way of letting ideas come to you. So often after I finish my writing for the day, I will go, I mean, I'm in Colorado, right? Colorado people tend to be in their bodies, right? We like to go run, we like to go hike, we like to do bike, swim, whatever. So I do one of those, and especially for me, running, perhaps because I'm going fast enough, and that's not that fast, but fast enough where I'm not stopping to look at this cute dog or this great garden. My brain can kind of just shut down, and ideas will kind of come to me. But I also very much agree with Alan, you can't wait for inspiration. I mean, when I don't actually know that I ever have writer's block, because what I do is I'm going to write from this time to this time. And maybe it'll be 10 words I get out, maybe it'll be many, many pages, which is awesome. Unless it's really a really good 10 words, then that's even better. But, and I think if I can't think of what the next line is going to be, I start asking, this is very pragmatic, I start asking myself questions about the setting. And I want to know what that room is like. So I just start writing about it and describing it. And certain words will come up, certain images. And I think I'm very, my background is the visual arts, and I came to writing very late. I'm very driven by the visual arts and driven by imagery. So those images start sparking new ideas, and if I'm stuck as to what's going to happen next, sometimes those images will actually tell me. So I think if you allow yourself to just have a certain amount of time to write, if you are old-fashioned like me and you keep a paper calendar and you literally block it off, and you go down and you sit your ass in that, where your writing desk is, if you have a writing desk, in a cafe, wherever works for you, and just start writing. I think some days, not every day, good things will happen. And then you'll get inspired by the sentence that you just wrote. I know.
If I'm not in the middle of a project, I tend to just kind of honor the block. I feel like it's normal not to write all the time. This is partly about just the way I work. I'm pretty productive. I work in short forms that accumulate. I think it's very different. I'm married to a novelist. I think if you're writing a novel, you do kind of have to have a practice. And I think a writing practice is a beautiful thing in any form. But for me, if I force myself to write and I'm in a quote unquote block period, I don't say anything interesting. I'll say things that I've said before. I'm repeating my greatest hits kind of. And it's really boring. It's boring to me, and I know it would be boring to a reader. So usually what that means is I just need to take a break and live for a while and just gather input, install important updates, go for a hike, read a lot, wait for something to feel new and interesting again. But I do sometimes like any writer, I do eventually get impatient and feel oh, I want to be working. Often what works for me is just asking for an assignment. If somebody just says, well, why don't you write about X? Or just hands me an idea, however grab bag it is, it can be a starting point because it didn't come from me because it's external. It suddenly feels new and I can do something with it. Or I'll kind of do what Alan was saying, I'll go back to an old notebook and look at my old notes and see if there's some little loose thread that was exciting to me at some point that I never followed up on, and take it from there. And I actually wrote the last poetry book that I finished that's coming out later this year by digging through my old tweets and looking for tweets that might be interesting lines of poetry and then writing poems around them. So yeah, I do get to that desperate stage where I'm just mining my old material for something that I could possibly use.
Thank you. And it sounds like all of your answers about either breaking through the block or even just trying to get restarted again, it sounds like you're all trying to re-find the joy or the fun or at least the creative experience again. And that seems so essential. Because I think for me, writer's block is always about fear of failure, and that could be so overwhelming, and you have to accept failure as a part of the process, and that you and embrace it. And I think for me, just like the block could be, I don't know, sometimes I'll draw a tarot card and just try and use that to inspire what I'm writing that day. Even if it doesn't necessarily fit what I'm writing, I make it fit somehow. And that's there's a surprise there because I never know what card I'm going to draw. So there's that surprise is a joy for me. So I think it inspires something about not knowing where I'm going, which is kind of my process. But yeah, I feel like we are at the point of audience questions with 15 minutes left. Is there anyone? Yes, please come up to the mic.
Hi, I'm
Hey.
Tawana. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
You guys are great. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here. I think I've had an opportunity to be around all of you except for you, and I think I've worked with you too, so that's fantastic. I wanted to ask and kind of say something about writer's block because I was one of those people that didn't believe in it. And I'm 58, and I started writing when I was about 4, until I got writer's block a couple years ago. And what my experience was that I was writing memoir. And it was a trauma-based memoir. And I reached a point where I could not write. And I didn't understand it. And I knew what my story was. And I always thought that writer's block just meant someone didn't know what their story was. They had just reached a point and they really were in that middle or they really didn't know where they were going. And that's what the writer's block was. But that wasn't what was happening with me. I could not write. It was almost like a physiological experience. And it was almost 2 years that I could not write. Now, I think if I had chosen to work on some different project during that time, I might have been able to write. But since I decided to stay in the memoir, I was not able to write. So I wanted to just see, because I know you guys write different kinds and write in different genres, do you think that that at all affects your process and your ability to be creative and how your work evolves and develops? And if it does get impacted by something like writer's block based on genre?
Go ahead.
My experience, genre doesn't really have much of an effect. But I do think I can get too close to a singular project and need to take a step back, which it sounds kind of like what your experience was. I try to have several things going at once, mostly because I came to writing late, only in the last few years, and I'm just I'm gonna put out everything I can, But by having, and particularly as a graphic novelist, I'm not drawing all the things, I'm having different artists draw them. So it means that I can push multiple projects forward at once, and they're very different. So if I get too burnt out on doing this sci-fi thing, then I can do one like a slice of life story or something like that. And one sort of either fuels the other or loosens the tightness around the other.
And I always think about this line that I can't remember who said it, but if you ever want to write a short story, start writing a novel, because then you just crave that need to finish something small and easy, and you're like, oh, the novel, done, push that away, give you the short story again. And I also think about how when I'm working on multiple projects at once, I'm solving problems in one project by working on something else, even unconsciously. And I just trust that about it, because even if I'm writing about something totally different, there still seem to be parallels at times that I just unconsciously come out. So I just trust that part of the process, that even working on something else, you're still working on the thing that you want to work on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Anyone?
We have answered all your questions. I can
Yeah.
see it.
You're all so inspired.
So inspired.
Right.
I think Torin was also supposed to see if there are any questions from the virtual world,
Oh, okay.
but he's disappeared outside with his cowboy hat. I have one more question, but I also don't want to take anybody else's space. No?
All right, let's do your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever, I guess, when you think about, like, as you were developing as an artist and growing up and sort of, like, learning the process and learning just what you wanted to do with it, did you ever hear any bad advice about inspiration or about your process? Like, what's something that actually you learned was not accurate or was not, like, helpful?
So I think I, like everybody, I came to writing late in my life, definitely. Hopefully not too late, hopefully keeps on going for a while. But, you know, there is this idea, I think, that we all grow up with, that every single movie about artists has a moment of inspiration, the hallelujah moment, right? That, you know, Edith Piaf is you know, a ragamuffin on the Parisian streets, dressed in a, you know, trench coat, and has never sung in public before, and she comes out and she's Edith Piaf. And she's absolutely inspired, and it's amazing and brilliant. And you know, I think the Beats also sort of perpetuated this a little bit. Like, you know, you take enough, you know, speed and drive fast, and then you write a book in the space of 24 hours. And you know, I grew up, you know, hearing that a lot, and I think I thought, oh, that's maybe how it's supposed to work. And then I started trying to make art and realized that that wasn't so much how it was supposed to work. And then I worked for a visual art gallery in San Francisco called Galleria de la Raza. And I remember there's this amazing artist, Esther Hernandez. And we had this group that I was part of, Regeneration Project it was called, young artists. And this one guy was talking to Esther, and he was like, oh, you know, I've got this great idea, this amazing idea, and I can't wait to do it. It's just incredible. Let me tell you all about it. And she was like, honey, stop. She's like, your ideas don't mean shit. Go put it on the canvas. And so that's actually good advice, but the opposite of what you asked for. But and it's a long way of, you know, kind of going there. But I think that that's the idea that inspiration just kind of comes, and the idea is enough. I think that's something that a lot of maybe younger people believe.
I like that, actually, and building off Dino's foundation, not just applying that to inspiration, but applying it to your idea of success. Because we always have this idea that somebody made it, like there is a moment, they were discovered, and they made it, rather than it is a series of moments. But also as an artist, you have to decide what represents success for you. Because getting published, that's what a lot of people see as the end goal, but that's not the end. Like, do you want to be on a big press? Do you want to you want to live full-time as a writer? Do you want to speak in places? Like, you have to define what represents success to you. Or do you just want to represent your soul in the best way possible through your art? You know, like, those are real questions that you have to ask yourself, because if you don't know what represents success for you, you are constantly chasing after something but don't know what it is. So your energy is divided and you're kind of scattered, and you're looking for this sort of odd external validation, and there's not much happiness in that. So when you decide what represents success for you, then you can go for that thing, and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree. This sort of romantic fallacy that is just so harmful of the starving artist or the struggling artist that my students, I work at an art school, really still struggle with, and it is harmful, I would say. So that is bad advice that our culture continues to perpetuate. Like, I want to be a joyful artist, right? I want to pay my bills. I want to, like, support my family and, you know, live a good life with art in it and making art. So yeah, I fight that bad advice from culture for sure.
Yeah, and I want to add something. The idea of success, I think if you're an artist, you're going to get so much rejection. It comes all the time. And then you get a nice letter and you're like, wow, you know, it's fantastic. You get a lot of rejection. And that can grind you down. And I think you always have to go back to why you wanted to write in the first place. I don't think it was to be famous. Maybe it was, I don't know. Good luck. It's the joy you get in creating something. It's really, it's a joyful experience. It's wonderful. It's so much fun. It's so much fun to get in, with your ideas or just the images that come to your mind and try to construct an entire new world. It's such a joyful thing. And the other ideas of success are, I won the Nobel, whatever. That's awesome, how fantastic, but that's not going to get you through the day, through your day as an artist. Maybe it does, I don't know. Not gonna get me through the day.
Elisa?
Yeah, this isn't like advice that I got from anyone in particular, but I do feel like there's this kind of pervasive idea in communities I've been in that like whatever genre or kind of style you're working in, there's certain foundational texts or artists or writers that like you should have already experienced. Like you should have already read them, you should know all about them, and that can be this barrier to approaching them if you haven't already, because you're kind of like, you feel like it's too late or you're embarrassed or something. And I just reject that. And like whenever I hear someone say like, oh, I'm finally getting around to this thing, and like they're clearly kind of apologetic about it, I'm always just like, no, don't say finally. Like there's never a too late time to come to a book or a piece of art. And I just feel like you come to things when you come to them. Like it's never too late to read Moby Dick or Zabald or whoever the person is that you feel like everybody else has already read. That's been like a really liberating kind of change in my mindset that I've just embraced more and more as I've gotten older. And I just feel like there's no wrong time to read something, and like let inspiration strike when it will. Like don't deny yourself something because you feel like you should have read it earlier.
And I love this idea of sort of like releasing yourself from the pressure, both in terms of like influence from texts that you should have read by now, but also the pressure of like trying to make a product and sell that product, and that's the goal. And like to me, I think that's the advice that I had to overturn at some point, was just that this is not about neatly wrapping a thing up and then like that's your success. It's more about, for me, a lifelong process of joy and like creativity and growth, and hopefully something like being proud of what you write or what you create. So I kind of want to end on joy, unless anyone has a question out there that we maybe inspired in the last minute or so. Nope? Okay.
Sorry, Zoom questions.
Yeah, no Zoom questions?
Oh, okay. We did answer everybody's
We
questions.
did.
Awesome.
Cool. We beat writer's block just now.
Count yourselves inspired.
Yeah.
Right.
Eureka.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, panelists. Lovely to have you and just hear all your thoughts.
Thank you, Lumans.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Good job, Alan. Fun. Yeah.